There you go. As you can see, those are the live pictures from Washington, D.C., where we heard the Israeli ambassador to the US speaking to our correspondent, Mark Stone. He asked him the question when there might be a ceasefire in Lebanon when fighting is ongoing. The answer we had there was that we have not been able to move to a new era. We would not be able to move to a new era of peace if it hadn't been for Israel degrading Hezbollah. That is a change that Netanyahu has brought across the region. So those words there from the Israeli ambassador in Washington, as, of course, those historic direct talks happen between Lebanon and Israel. Let's go straight to Mark Stone, who is there for us now. You just saw him asking that question. Mark, what did you make of the answer you got?
Yeah, very, very interesting. You know, these are extraordinary times. The idea that an Israeli ambassador would be talking about Israelis holidaying in Lebanon and the Lebanese holidaying in Israel. Extraordinary. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. That is not going to happen for some time. But the very fact that he is talking about it and that he believes, on the face of it at least, that the Lebanese government is alongside his government in trying to rid Hezbollah from the region, from the area. That is significant. Of course, it's worth saying we haven't heard from the Lebanese ambassador. She was opposite him in that extraordinary meeting, a lengthy meeting due to last an hour. It ended up lasting, I think, over 2 hours. We haven't heard her assessment. We've only heard the Israeli government's assessment through Michael Leiter there, the ambassador here in Washington, but significant stuff. He seems to believe that they are now in a place where perhaps the Lebanese armed forces, that is the Lebanese army, clearly distinct from Hezbollah, can take some sort of greater role in trying to deal with Hezbollah. Now, it is worth saying that as things stand, Hezbollah and Israel are still exchanging fire. So we're not at a stage where there is a ceasefire at the moment, but the fact that they're talking is significant. There was one fascinating aside where he had a real pop at the French. Of course, the French have a historic association with Lebanon. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has been hugely critical of Israel over many years now, increasingly critical of Israel's stance in Gaza and in Lebanon. And so it was clear from the Israeli ambassador, certainly, that they want the French to have as little as possible to do with any forging of peace between Israel and Lebanon. But watch this space. That was a fascinating moment. It's only ambassadorial level. There are so many issues, so many things can go wrong still. And as things stand, the fighting is still ongoing. But this is, you know, it's kind of a byproduct of the wider war with Iran that has been the focus for so long. But maybe things coming together. And as he drove off in his armoured vehicle, I said to him, how much do you credit President Trump for this? And he said, a lot. I mean, I think it is probably fair to say that had President Trump not pushed Israel to attend this meeting at ambassadorial level, it might not have happened, certainly not this soon.
Thank you very much, Mark Stone, for us there in Washington, where those direct talks between Lebanon and Israel are taking place. Now let's move on to politics a bit closer at home. You're watching the Politics Hub, and as we know, there's been plenty of criticism of our military capability recently. General Sir Richard Barron said our army could seize a small market town on a good day. The former Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has said we risk being laughed at. But now we have seen an intervention from someone who is, frankly, in a completely different category. So George Robertson is a Labour peer. He is a former Labour Defence Secretary. He's actually the man who co-wrote the government's Strategic Defence Review. And tonight, he is laying into the government's defence policy. In a speech, we expect him to say that we are underprepared, we are underinsured, we are under attack, we are not safe. Britain's national security and safety is in peril. And he's also going to warn there is a corrosive complacency today in Britain's political leadership. Lip service is paid to the risks, the threats, the bright red signals of danger, but even a promised national conversation about defence can't be started. doesn't come much more damning than that. He is delivering his lecture, setting out his thoughts in more detail right now, and we will, of course, bring you the very latest on that over the course of the programme tonight. The question now for the government is, how would they pay for it? Where do you get the tens of billions it would cost to boost defence spending in any meaningful ways when other areas, as we know, are looking at cuts? And we're going to try and grapple with that question over the course of the show tonight. But first, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is in Salisbury, where Lord Robertson is making that speech, and she has sent us her analysis.
This is a hugely significant intervention by Lord Robertson. Not only is he a former Labour Defence Secretary and former head of NATO, he's also the man who Sir Keir Starmer himself appointed to head the Prime Minister's own defence review, which was published last year. In that document, Lord Robertson and his fellow reviewers set out very clearly the parlous state of UK defences following decades of underfunding. And then they set out the path to recovery, the path to rearming, the path, they said, to make the UK armed forces ready to fight. And the Prime Minister came out, he endorsed that document. He said he wanted the UK armed forces to be war-fighting ready. And yet, since then, we've had a lot of strong words and very little action. And behind the scenes, Lord Robertson, he has been clearly frustrated privately. He has also spoken publicly, underlining to Parliament, to MPs in speeches before this one, about the nature of the threat, the fact that we are underprepared and not ready to fight and need to invest. But this is the first time he has come out and spoken so pointedly and politically about the potential solution, as well as also talking about that complacency, that corrosive complacency when it comes to UK defence. He's clearly voicing frustration, particularly at Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and the Treasury, at this failure to turn words into action, to come out and properly invest in UK defences. This whole defence investment plan, which is supposed to be the meat on the bones of the defence review that Lord Robertson authored, that has yet to be published. It was supposed to be out in autumn of last year. We still don't know when it's going to be released. The Defence Secretary, who I spoke to on Friday, couldn't even say if it was going to come out before MPs break up for the summer. And today, my colleague Sam Coates and I are reporting about how military chiefs are again under pressure to find efficiency savings, billions of pounds of efficiency savings in order to make the money work. The armed forces are under pressure. They're being told they need to rearm. And now the man who set out the blueprint for how that should happen is coming out and saying very squarely to the Prime Minister that what you are doing at the moment is not good enough, and the country is not being protected. It's being left in peril at a time of growing security threats.
So Deborah Haynes is going to keep across that speech for us. We've also heard from the Defence Minister, Luke Pollard, about Lord Robertson's remarks.
Well, if there's anyone who knows the mess that we inherited, it's Lord Robertson, because he led the Strategic Defence Review work that proposed moving the United Kingdom to a different posture, moving us to war-fighting readiness. We adopted every single one of his recommendations in the Strategic Defence Review, and we're making sure that the Defence Investment Plan is right, and we'll publish it very shortly to give a sense of the next 10 years of investment. But we're not waiting for that Defence Investment Plan to announce new contracts.
Well, I'm joined now by the chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tan Dessy. Thanks so much for being here, for hot-footing it over from Westminster. So you are obviously, I expect, going to bang the drum for defence spending. That's going to be really difficult choices, isn't it?
Well, Ali, as a Defence Committee, we have been banging the drum for several months now, recognising the dangers and threats that our country faces. And I think Lord Robertson's public intervention is sobering. The fact that somebody of his stature and experience has made that public announcement. And by the way, this is somebody who has appeared before the Defence Committee to give evidence on previous occasions. It's the person that the government tasked to head up its strategic defence review. I just hope that because of his intervention, that the government actually brings about some action.
Do you think they are going to listen now?
Well, I hope so, because the Defence Committee repeatedly has been saying that we need to meet the moment given the increased threat levels within our continent. We see that the world around us has become more volatile. It's not just the crisis in the Middle East. If we look at the hybrid threats, the UK is the third most targeted nation on the planet in terms of cyber attacks.
But I suppose for your party, in terms of the difficult decisions that means, something that Lord Robertson talked about was, as he called it, a ballooning welfare bill. Do you think is that somewhere where money could be saved? I mean, what difficult choices do you think would need to be made?
That is a decision for the Prime Minister to be taking as to where the budget itself, how things will be carved up. But for us as a nation, we need to recognise the moment and we need to invest, because if we do not invest now, we will be sorry in the long run. And it's incredibly important, by the way, that the government not only increases investment in defence, it needs to publish the Defence Investment Plan. That was promised since autumn. I asked the Minister this morning in the Defence Committee evidence session. Unfortunately, we could not get a date. I've asked that of the Prime Minister in the liaison committee sessions as well as the Defence Secretary. But that is incredibly important because since 2023, we have not had the annual equipment plan. And this Defence Investment Plan would be a 10-year plan to outline and give a clear demand signal to the British defence industrial base as to where we need to invest. But it also is a signal to our allies and adversaries that the UK, that we are serious about defence.
A story we're doing on Sky News today, I want to get your reaction to. This is Sam Coates and Deborah Haynes. Military chiefs have been asked to find £3.5 billion in efficiencies. So the MOD being asked to make savings. What do you make of that? Well,
those savings are just part of apparently a reported shortfall of £28 billion. Either which way, the Ministry of Defence also needs to increase its reputation in terms of value for money. How that reform, I know the Defence Secretary has talked about reforming the institution, but while we need to have that accountability and transparency within the Ministry of Defence, the Treasury also needs to ensure that it does pump money into defence.
We cannot have now to spend the money in the right way.
Well, that's something that they need to demonstrate. They've said to the Defence Committee again and again that they are looking at better ways of working, of ensuring that value for money, but we cannot have anybody blocking that investment. It's great to see that after years of hollowing out of our defence, and we as a nation have benefited from that peace dividend since the end of the Cold War. I know the government is saying, and the Chancellor has been saying, that we've got the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. But unfortunately, that is not enough. And that's why the Defence Committee has asked that we reach 3% in this Parliament in order that we can get to the 3.5% agreed NATO target by 2035. There's no point in us kicking the can down the road to the next Parliament. It needs to happen now. If it's done in an increased profile so that the increments are not just backloaded, then we will ensure value for money. We also, as the British taxpayer, will not be hit by defence inflation to that great an extent. So it's important that we invest now because the threat is now, and the Defence Committee has pointed that out. Do you think in our report, the UK's contribution to European security as well as defence in the grey zone as to how we need to do that at this point in time?
Do you think Rachel Reeves has been a roadblock here?
Well, the Chancellor appeared before the Treasury Select Committee. I know that she has said that she has passed it on. When I questioned the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee just recently, he said that it's on his desk that he is ensuring that things are working at pace.
That's going to happen? Are you frustrated by all this?
Look, I think most defence experts, people with a keen interest in keeping our country safe and secure, we all want to see that investment plan published. So I'm not really too concerned about whose desk it's on, as long as we have that published, because I know that many within the defence industry, especially a lot of the SMEs, a lot of them are saying we can't plan, and therefore that will hamper their ability to function as well as to increase investment and hold on to staff.
OK, Tan Desi, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, thanks so much for talking to us on the Politics Hub this evening. I think you're going to hot-foot it over to vote in Parliament, so thanks for giving us the time. Let's bring in our panel for this evening, the former Cabinet Minister Sir Gavin Williamson and former SNP MP Hannah Bardell. Thank you both for being here. And, of course, Gavin Williamson, you were Defence Secretary, we should say, so it's good to have you on this evening. I think it's your first time on the Politics Hub panel as well.
It is, first time invited.
Welcome, will be nice. I guess, so Lord Robertson, in your experience, Lord Robertson's talking about the Treasury as being a blocker. How was the relationship when you were there with the Treasury?
It's pretty consistent, and knowing George, I know that he would have been massively reluctant to make this public statement, and he will have only done it out of total frustration, because it's obvious to anyone that's looking at this, there's a desperate need for quick action. And if the Treasury is anything like it's always been, it'll be blocking it, and it will be not wanting to make the commitment that's actually needed. And that's what's driven him to make the public statement he has, because he's a very loyal, very decent man that's a team player, and it will have it just goes to show how dire he feels it is that he's had to do this.
I mean, this does feel like an important moment, right, Hannah?
Absolutely, and I mean, it's significant friendly fire, I would say, from George Robertson, because he, as Gavin says, he's got significant gravitas. But we've got to look at the context and the history of this as well, that we are talking about decades, and including under Gavin's previous administration, significant underfunding of particularly conventional defences. And, the SNP have always argued moving away from nuclear, scrapping nuclear weapons, using that money to invest in conventional and new hybrid threats, and that includes cyber threats. Now, we've been in the situation in Scotland, in the high north, that we are becoming increasingly threatened by Russia. That's the obvious entry point to the UK. And we've had, fishing vessels spotting Russian submarines off the coast of the north of Scotland, which is a ludicrous situation. But we've also got troops being sent into conflict who are not always properly equipped. And I know that from, personal experience and my own family members. But for George Robertson to intervene at this moment, criticising his own government, and he's obviously referencing history, but he's talking about right now that there might be a plan coming, but where is it? Where is the resource? And what is happening? Because we are in a very dangerous moment in history, and I think that we need to be properly equipped for that in all realms.
Has Hannah got a point there? Long time underinvestment, including when the Tories were in power and you were Defence Secretary?
Well, we saw increases in defence spending, sort of starting from when I was Defence Secretary. But the reality is all governments going back to 1990 have been taking a peace dividend, as has been Tam himself referenced. And what we're having to do is wake up to a very different reality, and that reality means there's going to be some really difficult choices. And you saw Kemi just yesterday actually reaching out across the dispatch box and say there are going to be some tough choices in order to be able to get the type of investment that we need to keep ourselves safe. If we really want to do that, those tough choices are ones that we're actually willing to talk with the government and work with the government to make those choices, because actually the best way of keeping ourselves safe is investing in terms of the deterrence that we need to keep this country safe, but that's going to cost a lot of money.
And you don't think that's the right answer, right? You don't want...
No, and I think, leaving some of the partnerships that we've had, like SAFE, which has allowed us to access European funding. Now, some of that's a result of Brexit, but some of it is a result of choices that have been made by the previous Conservative and the current Labour government, who, interestingly, are being pressured now by Spain and other countries to rejoin the EU. And certainly rejoin some of those partnerships, because certainly from a Scottish and I think UK perspective, the EU and NATO are the two pillars of our defence, and working with our European partners as the US becomes more and more dangerous and more unpredictable, we need to be working with our European partners, and we are at risk of becoming even more isolated.
What do you make of that, Gavin?
Well, the reality is the only defensive alliance that you actually have in Europe is NATO. The command structures, the European Union doesn't have a command structure. And actually, the UK was quite happy and has always been quite happy to participate in defence procurement across Europe. You're seeing that with Tempest, which is the next generation fighter, which has Italians that are involved working with the UK. Hopefully we'll one day have Germans involved, but also has Japanese involvement as well. And Britain's always been a crucial pillar to European defence, but it doesn't mean you have to be part of European Union. NATO is the thing that creates the command structures that are needed in order to defend the whole of the United Kingdom.
OK, lots to talk about, and we will come back to you very shortly. But let's talk now about the Chancellor, who's due to land in Washington this evening for the International Monetary Fund spring meeting. But she'll be coming down to earth. The news that Britain's economic prospects have been downgraded more than any other major economy in the IMF's latest update on the state of the world. Well, with more on that, here's our economics editor, Ed Conway.
So we've just had the latest forecast from the International Monetary Fund. Basically, every 6 months they kind of update their forecasts on the state of the economy, and we've just had their update when it comes to the impact of what's happening in Iran, in the Gulf. This is what they were forecasting for economic growth across the G7, so major industrialised economies for this year before the latest update, so before the impact of what's happening in Iran and elsewhere. And look at the UK in particular, so 1.3% growth, not enormously strong, but still, you know, it's kind of like towards the upper end of the pack. Now I'm going to show you these latest forecasts, just through from the IMF. Have a look at this. Same year. So that's all for 2026. And you can see how the UK goes down by 0.5 percentage points. That's a bigger downgrade than any other economy in the world. But worth saying, you know, everyone gets downgraded a bit. Even the US, which is a big energy exporter, and Canada get downgraded a little bit, but just a little bit, whereas the UK is down by 0.5 percentage point. So that's very big. And it's also in line with what the OECD, so another organisation, another kind of economic body, think. UK gets downgraded more than anyone else. And when it comes to inflation as well, so this is the inflation forecast for this year from the International Monetary Fund, the latest figures. And again, you can see, look, there's France at the bottom. There's the UK joint top in terms of our inflation rate expected for this year. So we have one of the highest rates of inflation. We have the biggest downgrade of economic growth, albeit not taking us to the kind of lowest rate of growth. A lot of people are going to wonder, why is it that the UK is being so badly affected? Part of the answer is that a lot of this comes back to energy, and we are a big energy importer. Not obviously, you know, everyone else, many of those other countries are, but nonetheless, it comes down to energy. And this is what the IMF thought was happening to energy prices last time around. That was their forecast for energy prices, things like oil, things like gas. This is what they now think is going to happen. Look at that big spike, so much higher energy prices are forecast now in this latest World Economic Outlook, their update on the state of the global economy. Final thing to note, there's an interesting dichotomy between the impact on countries that are energy exporters. So what this is basically showing is, have there been upgrades or have there been downgrades to their economic growth forecast? That's energy exporters. And you can see, actually, energy exporters did kind of all right out of this because energy prices are higher, so they're making more money out of it. But energy importers get bigger downgrades. And that's basically where the UK is. It falls into this area. As for the Gulf, so those Gulf states, even though they're big energy exporters, they can't get that energy out because of the closure of the strait. And so they're seeing a big downgrade. But all told, essentially the IMF pointing out that this is bad for most countries around the world. But unfortunately, it is particularly bad for the UK.
Well, here's what the Chancellor had to say in response to that IMF report. The war in Iran is not our war, but it will come at a cost to the UK. These are not costs I wanted, but they are costs we will have to respond to. I vowed that my economic approach to this crisis will be both responsive to a changing world and responsible in the national interest, keeping inflation and interest rates in check to protect households and businesses. We entered this conflict in a stronger position because of the choices this government took to build economic stability, but there is more to do. Let's bring Gavin and Hannah back in, shall we? I mean, Hannah, you know, we could do all this talking about defence spending, but is the truth that we can't afford it, looking at that very depressing chart from Ed Conway?
I mean, appreciates a Hobson's choice, but I think the reality is that we have left one of the biggest trading partners and partnerships that we had in the EU. Our GDP has shrunk by tens of billions of pounds, about 6 to 8% of gross domestic produce. And the Labour Party know that, the Labour government know that, yet they are failing, despite many calls, to respond to that. And I think obviously there's a downgrading across the board. The war in Iran and Ukraine and general global instability is having a massive impact, but we are so much more exposed. It's much more expensive. I was talking to a business the other day who used to operate out of the UK. They were saying it's just so much more expensive to do that now, and they've now moved operations elsewhere because the trade barriers are so significant. We've lost a huge chunk of people. The immigration that we have now coming into our workforce is 80% non-EU. So those things have had a profound impact. And I would imagine, I know it wasn't mentioned in the report, but that Brexit is playing a huge part in that.
Gavin, interested to hear your view on that.
Well, I think it's oil and gas prices that are impacting, and you saw that from what the OECD has said. It's the increase in oil and gas, and the reality is we have oil and gas reserves in this country, but the Labour...
But the prices are set internationally, aren't they?
Yes, but Labour and the SNP have blocked and will continue to block the access to using these resources. But there is a different approach. We've always taken an approach of actually taxing in the way that we do. The reality is there's a lot of oil and gas producing countries that actually have production sharing agreements. So instead of GB Energy being this completely pointless waste of time that doesn't do anything, actually you could give options to those oil and gas fields actually for a chunk of that domestic production to be for domestic use at a certain price and actually change the tax regime. And you'd have a massive investment in the North Sea.
I mean, is that really going to offset all of this?
It's not going to offset all of it, but it will give us a big competitive advantage. And we've seen in those figures, those who are actually producing their own energy are weathering this storm better. So we should be producing it. We should have a different approach. Look at the Treasury. Every month, they're already getting an extra £500 million extra as a result in this oil and gas price spike. We could actually have a completely different approach, liberate British companies, international investors to start developing the North Sea again and actually be producing our own oil and gas and actually benefiting British businesses and British households. But you need some imagination, you need some guts, and frankly, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the SNP seem to be blockers, not wanting to actually help people.
The SNP have imagination and guts to get the economy back on track.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, the irony of what Gavin is saying is that he's arguing, from what I can gather, very much for what the SNP argued for a very long time, which was a sovereign wealth fund, which was to have the management and control of our resources and not have, you know, the exposure that we now have and the lack of investment in, particularly in renewable energy. It has been decades-long underinvestment in renewable energy that has led us to be so reliant on oil and gas. And let's not forget the billions and billions that were taken out of the North Sea went straight to Westminster, straight into those coffers, and Scotland never saw a penny of it. And so if we're talking about a future and what that looks like, I mean, there was an economist the other day that was saying, look, the reality is it takes several years to get new, and I worked in the energy industry myself for a number of years. It takes a number of years to get new fields on stream. The war in Iran, let's hope, will be long gone and over by then. Let's not use, you know, those arguments as a stick for us, particularly for green energy to be disinvested in. And, you know, Grangemouth, I mean, we were refining all of the UK's oil as it was coming on shore, and not a bit of investment from Labour, despite many, many promises.
Briefly, you can come back to that, Gavin.
Well, there's going to be certain areas of agreement. We do need to have refinery capacity, but actually we're hearing that some of those fields can be on by Christmas, and actually that's a choice that should be taken. And we'll need oil and gas for many generations to come. I mean, if we want plastics, we're going to have oil. And there's a reality that this government isn't facing up to. OK,
thank you both. We'll come back to you. The impact of the war on the UK economy is, of course, likely to feature on our late-night show, The Wrap, tonight from 10 o'clock. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the journalist and broadcaster Sonia Soda and the political commentator Adam Bolton. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the government announces the closure of 11 asylum hotels, but are they just moving rather than solving the problem?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
11 asylum hotels have been closed, saving nearly £65 million a year, with more set to close in the coming weeks, the government has announced today. But Home Office Minister Alex Norris has denied that the department is just moving the problem from hotels to more basic accommodation like former military barracks. Well, I spoke to him a little earlier. So 11 hotels are being put back into public use. 11 out of how many?
There's, under the previous government, that number reached more than 400. We're now under 185 over in this country. The right level for that, of course, is nil. We made a commitment at the general election to close all these hotels, so I'm glad that the 11 we've announced this week is part of that plan for closure.
So there's still about 170?
In the mid-180s at the moment, still to be closed, yeah.
OK, and how long, when are we going to find out more about those hotels?
Well, we've committed that over the course of this Parliament they will all close, and that's what will happen. But across this spring, you'll see an accelerated programme of more closures. It's 11 this week with more to come.
And so, I guess, you know, this is something, but it is very much the beginning, right?
Well, it's a process. As I say, we're now down more than half than what it was at its peak. It's still too many. But through that pivot to more basic alternative sites, by removing people at a quicker rate than in previous years, we're getting that number down. We'll get it to nil. And
can I just confirm, where are these people being moved to?
Well, it's a mixture of factors. As I say, we're pivoting now to the use of more basic accommodation, like military sites. Similarly, we're removing at a much faster rate than we have for many years. So those who've got no right to be here are leaving the country and leaving the supported population. So we don't need to house as many people. And across those factors, that's allowing us to close hotels.
Is part of this, you know, moving the problem elsewhere, though? We've seen protests outside places like Crowborough, the military barracks, where people are being moved to because people who live locally don't want that to happen either. So, you know, I guess is this just moving people around and not necessarily solving the problem?
Well, I don't accept that in the sense that, as I say, we are removing people more quickly than our predecessors. That's a big step forwards. But also, moving people out of hotel accommodation reduces the impact on those communities, but also reduces pull factors for people to come to this country. Because at the moment, the traffickers say, well, come to the UK, you'll be put up in a hotel, you can work illegally. Well, we're closing those hotels. We're using dignified but more, more basic accommodation like military sites. I think that's the right balance in tackling this problem for the British public in its balance.
I mean, is it changing the pull factors, though? Because, more than 5,000 people have crossed the Channel this year so far. We're only just at the beginning of the year. We've yet to get through the summer. Last year, we saw nearly the second highest number ever. I mean, have Labour reduced the pull factors? Because that's not being borne out in the numbers.
Well, this is part of a larger programme. We announced in November, we rolled out the first elements in March, the biggest reforms to our asylum system in a generation to reduce that pull factor. Accommodation is part of it, illegal working is part of it, and we're introducing measures, particularly in the gig economy. Of course, they take time, but we are seeing the progress that we're seeing, and that's why we're seeing, closures of hotels, which are steps in the right direction.
You talk about progress. How should we measure that progress? Because people look at the number of people crossing the Channel and they don't yet see the numbers going down. How should people at home measure your success?
Well, they should measure us by what we committed to. And we committed to closing all the hotels. And they can see now that we are well on that journey.
But this is fundamentally about bringing the number of Channel crossings down, not about closing hotels?
Well, it's about all the elements, because, hotels particularly are real flashpoints of possible community disorder or of lost economic opportunities or places of, where people have those rites of passage. So they themselves are important. That's why they were such an important part of our manifesto and the conversations we're having at general election. So I think the public expect to see us deliver on that. They know there will always be, some degree of supported population, because we have a history of a nation of providing sanctuary to those who need it, and people who are destitute otherwise whilst they wait for their claim. Of course, they need to be housed and supported. So, people are frustrated about those hotels. They need to close, and that's the work that we're doing.
I mean, you've sort of alluded to this. You're facing a threat from the left as well as the right. Your press release today talked about illegal migrants. I mean, these people have complex backstories, some of them coming from places like Iran. Do you think there's a political danger, and perhaps even a moral danger, by the way that you're talking about this?
I mean, this has never been about the politics. This isn't about chasing votes. I watched our predecessors in the last parliament try to do that, making big promises, press release commitments on things that were empty activity, and all that built up was public anger. I don't think anybody should defend, and you do see people defend people coming to the country via irregular and dangerous means. People with the most agency are human traffickers. Anybody defending that model, you talk about moral challenges, that is morally wrong to defend that. This is a broken and disordered system. That's why we as a government are gripping that, reducing pull factors for people to come to the country, removing people who have no right to be here. That is the moral approach. And as I say, not about chasing press releases, never about chasing votes or, political sentiment, always about doing right by the British people.
Is closing hotels also about saving money?
Well, they are an expensive kind of sign of failure, but the prerogative here is about removing, that significant sort of gap and waste in communities, whether it's economic, whether it's the risk of disorder. Hotels, which have only been going since the last government, lost control of this problem at the end of the last decade. These are not inevitable. They need to be closed, and that's why we're closing them all.
How much money do you think you'll save?
Well, we've already taken £1 billion out of the asylum bill through the work that we've taken so far. This will contribute to it. If you think of
well, I'm just looking at these are Home Office figures. Hotels £144 a night. That's an estimate. And then Weatherfield, this is one of the military sites, 132, and that doesn't include the acquisition lease setup costs. Do you think you really will save money? Well,
because it's not about just purely a group of people moving from one set of accommodation to another. The point is about breaking that pull factor that says, actually, at the moment, the human traffickers, and we know this because it's in their materials, say, come to the UK, you'll be able to work illegally, you'll be put up in a hotel.
So I guess this doesn't mean we're not going to continue spending millions of pounds housing asylum seekers.
Well, we will have to house people who would otherwise be destitute. I think the British people would understand why that's important to do, but it's why it's important, too, that we make good decisions more quickly. Again, the previous government allowed a huge backlog to build up. That's why we ended up with hotels. We've tackled that. That's about treating people properly and making sure they don't need that support for a long period of times. And crucially, that when individuals have no right to be here, they don't sit for weeks, months, even years on end in taxpayer-supported accommodation. Instead, they're removed from this country, and that's what we're doing.
OK, let's bring Gavin and Hannah back in to talk about that story. So, Gavin, we're now seeing the Labour Party grappling with what you guys grappled with in government. What do you think of what we heard there from Alex Norris?
Well, I always welcome the news that more hotels are going to be closed. It's really wrong for communities. I know in my constituency we had 2 of those hotels. It does have an impact. It isn't the right place for the local community or the asylum seekers to be based. But we've got to be doing more to tackle the pull factors and the root causes in there. And my prediction will be, in the King's speech, you're going to see some legislation, sort of driven by this government that looks very much like the Rwanda scheme with a different name. And you're seeing that in the European Union, where they're actually, and I know Hannah loves the European Union, but that's what the EU's doing. And I think this government's going to be coming straight back to the same conclusion and the same solution that we had, but they'll give it a slightly fancier, different name, but it's still going to be the same.
What do you think, Hannah?
Well, I mean, at least in the European Union, they have safe and legal routes, which is something that we don't have as a result of Brexit. We left the Dublin Agreement, which gave us the ability to send people back to often the country that they last passed through. And we have removed the ability and the humanity, I think, from the system. And it's fascinating to me that policymakers and lawmakers cannot get their heads around the fact that we have significant skill shortages in the UK. 76% of employers report challenges in recruiting domestically. We have had a mass exodus as a result of Brexit, and we do not have enough people with the right skills. Now, we've developed programmes in Scotland, particularly for those in social care and in the medical profession, where we've brought doctors from places like Syria and Afghanistan, places that the UK have got a footprint from, a military perspective. We are responsible. I as a UK collective for some of the ills that have been visited upon these countries where people are coming from. So I think we have a moral duty to respect that, to respect those people and treat them in a humane way. You know, corralling them into a military barracks is not treating people in a humane way. And actually, a lot of people who come here have skills and abilities that could be fostered and nurtured. They could be welcomed into our communities. They could be welcomed into our, you know, employers who are desperately needing those skills. And instead, we are just trying to do something that's completely impossible and just making the situation worse. And the reason that there is such a market for illegal immigration is because we do not have safe and legal routes and we are not managing the system properly.
Do we need more safe and legal routes, Gavin?
We've already got safe and legal routes, but so if you've got people who are wanting to come to the UK, seek asylum, they're able to do that. But what you're touching on is the agreements between the European Union and the United Kingdom. But if an asylum seeker is in France, it's not an unsafe country. If an asylum seeker is in Italy, it's not an unsafe country. And I think it's maybe a little bit sweetly naive to think that all of these people who are trying to cross the channel have the exact skill set that our businesses are needing. We have to have a different route for people to come that apply formally and properly, and we're able to confirm that they have the skills that we need, that they're able to contribute to this country. That's not what is happening with that illegal crossings from a very safe country, France, over to the United Kingdom.
A lot of those programmes that we have for people coming, the thresholds are so high. We've stopped things like visas for partners of people who are coming as academics or who are coming to study.
I'm going to have to pause you there, sorry, because we were talking earlier in the programme about that speech tonight being delivered by Lord Robertson. Well, we've now got a clip. Let's have a quick listen.
I spent the best part of a year working on the new government's strategic defence review. And I can tell you now, bluntly, the conclusion of all of that work. We are underprepared, we're underinsured, we're under attack, we're not safe. Bluntly, that is the underlying message that we got. And the current conflict in the Middle East has to be a rude wake-up call to this country. On top of what we've already seen in Ukraine, it should remind us in the United Kingdom of our vulnerabilities. And there are many. And in it is a detailed blueprint for what needs to be done. It involves a wholesale transformation of how we guarantee homeland defence and simultaneously deter any adversary from even thinking of attacking us. But it needs money to deliver it. There is a corrosive complacency today in Britain's political leadership. Lip service is paid to the risks, the threats, the bright red signals of danger, but even the promised national conversation about defence can't be started. The cold reality of today's dangerous world is that we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget.
As expected, major intervention this evening by Lord Robertson, and we will keep you updated on that as it happens. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, thousands of councillors, parliaments in Wales and Scotland. The local elections could redraw the electoral map across Britain. We hear from Nigel Farage on what success looks like for reform.
Coming up on the UK tonight at 8, grooming survivors speak out after police closed their case without action following a 3.5-year review. Plus, a former Defence Secretary fires a warning about military spending, even as more savings are ordered by the Treasury. And we'll be discussing this year's very British list of inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. All that and much more on the UK tonight at 8.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Well, with only 3 weeks to go until the local elections, campaigning is in full swing, and the results, of course, will give a verdict on all the party leaders too. Alongside elections for Holyrood and the Senedd, the polls will elect thousands of councillors across more than 100 councils and 6 local authority mayors. Well, in a series of interviews with senior figures from all the parties, our political editor, Beth Rigby, sat down with Nigel Farage to talk about Trump, council tax and what success looks like for reform.
Walking into massive May elections. That Nigel Farage hopes will prepare him for a much bigger stage. This a key dress rehearsal for a general election, which Farage is determined to win. You're about to do a rally, the stage is set, you're polling second here. What does success look like for you in these May elections?
Complex series of answers. Here in Scotland, to become the opposition would be amazing. Be absolutely amazing. And if we embed ourselves there, we can move on in the years to come. In Wales, well, we're neck and neck. Right now, literally neck and neck with Plaid in those polls. The Labour Party, particularly in the valleys, Keir Hardie, real birthplace of the Labour Party, almost disappearing off the map. So, to be frank, coming first in Wales is the ambition. Whether we can remains to be seen. But Farage is facing obstacles. Do you think you've got a Trump problem? No. You don't? No. Luke Trill said that, of More in Common, says that the biggest barrier to people voting reform is Trump. I believe our relationship with America is absolutely crucial. So, for me, in terms of international relationships, it's America first, not Trump first. The reason I'm asking is, obviously, you have been close to Trump. It was long seen as an asset. You used it as an asset, that you had a close relationship with our closest ally. Is he now becoming a liability for you? Well, the Iran war has opened a whole load of questions, and extraordinary, isn't it? What do you think? The man who instinctively was always against all these foreign wars is now engaged in one. The reasons, I don't know. If it is to make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, then that is a very worthwhile aim. What worries me is what's the end game. Trump shared an AI-generated image of himself as Jesus Christ, which has deeply upset many Christians. I was quite shocked by it. Were you? It's not something I do. Were you surprised? I'm never surprised by what Trump does. Trying to distance himself from Trump and from reform candidates and councillors who made promises to voters they haven't kept. With your councils, there were promises made by candidates across multiple areas to freeze or cut council tax during last year's elections, and some of them have been reneged on. Well, Northamptonshire candidates signed a letter pledging a freeze, and council tax in that council's gone up 4.99%. As leader of the party, but when you put up thousands of candidates, individuals or groups may say different things. But the point is that you are stressing that you can't control what local candidates are promising, but this comes back to the delivery risk, doesn't it? Because if voters see a promise on a leaflet in Northamptonshire and that's reneged on... Well, I never saw that leaflet, and if I had, I would have decayed it. But do you need to tighten the message because you're finding that... But if you're a voter in Northamptonshire, you're going to be annoyed, aren't you? Because you were promised one thing, you voted for candidates, and your council tax has gone up. I spoke to all the local media. I did everything I could do to make the message very, very clear. Your opponents will say it makes you not credible. What do you say to that? We're not North Korea. I can't control individuals and thousands of people what they say.
For now, Reform are running a handful of councils across England, but that could all be about to change should Farage succeed in May and become a real party of government. He'll have proven he can deliver at the ballot box, delivering in office a much harder task. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Aberdeen.
OK, let's bring Hannah and Gavin back in for one final chat. A really interesting interview there. I mean, do you think that when, now that Nigel Farage's Reform are coming into contact with the reality of governing councils, they are finding it a bit more difficult than they expected, Hannah?
Certainly their track record says that, and there obviously have been several councils where it's just completely imploded and they've promised all sorts of things. They've got into power, they've not been able to cut council tax. Actually, they've increased it. The services have been completely run down. I think Kent has been, one particular one. So, I fear not just, and I think, one of my colleagues in Scotland, Mary McCallan, put it really well, for the tone of debate when Reform get in. I'm sure there are some people that are relatively because they're going. The polls say that they're going to pick up seats.
Local elections.
Local elections and in the national elections in Scotland and Wales. Now, how many they pick up depends on obviously how people vote, but I think that having people with that kind of rhetoric, and the closeness he has had to Trump, who has just become completely unhinged, is a huge problem. And it's about the tone of our politics and the fact that other parties are being pulled in that direction rather than taking it on, and as the Greens have done very successfully.
And do you think some polling suggests that his closeness to Trump is putting voters off? Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think people have hesitation. I think people look at how President Trump is conducting himself on the other side of the Atlantic. And
you know President Trump, we should say.
I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, but I think people do have reservations about that. But there's very serious reservations. In Staffordshire, we've got a Reform Control Council. We've had, I think, on the fourth leader of Staffordshire County Council, promised taxes weren't going to go up, and taxes are going up. So there's a bit of a gap between what's been said and what's been done.
We've also got a leader in Scotland, Malcolm Offord, who has, spouted some vile homophobic, racist rhetoric. It was he's come out and apologised, but it was only in 2018. And for somebody to hold those views, to be willing to express them publicly, and to be leading a party into an election where they may pick up a number of seats, for me, is a massively backward step. And it's no wonder that we have a sea of men leading parties and very few women and people from different backgrounds, and we are the poorer for that.
Have you been approached by Reform?
No. Not been approached, not had any conversations. Very much concentrating on making sure that the Conservatives are the next governing party in this country. OK,
thank you so much, Gavin and Hannah, for being on the panel this evening. That's it from us. We'll be back tomorrow. Up next, UK Tonight. See you tomorrow. Thank you both.